When you think of a medieval woman, what image comes to mind? Maybe a fair maiden with long blonde hair, a high forehead, plucked eyebrows, and pale complexion. Or maybe a pious nun with a modest veil. But how accurate are those stereotypes? Join us as we take a look at rare photos showing how medieval women really looked. The Windsor Beauties. If you want to see what the most alluring and powerful women of the 17th century looked like, you should take a look at the Windsor Beauties. These are a set of portraits painted by Sir Peter Lely, who was the official court painter of King Charles II after he restored the monarchy in 1660. The portraits depict some of the king's mistresses and some of his noble relatives and friends. They were originally hung at Windsor Castle, but now they're on display at Hampton Court Palace. They're among Lely's best work. The portraits not only capture the women's beauty, but also their stories and personalities. They show them in elegant outfits and poses, with accessories that have symbolic meanings. For example, Barbara Palmer, who was one of the king's most loyal and influential mistresses, is seen holding a pearl necklace he gave her. Frances Stuart, who was one of the king's unrequited loves, is wearing a dress with orange blossoms that represent her chastity. Elizabeth Hamilton, who was one of the king's cousins and a witty conversationalist, is depicted holding a fan showing her sophistication. These portraits also reveal what the beauty standards were at the time. The women have fair skin, long hair, plucked eyebrows, and small teeth. They also have slender necks, narrow chests, and low shoulders. Some have prominent stomachs as a sign of fertility and wealth. Additionally, they have soft expressions and graceful gestures that convey charm and intelligence. Tora. Another example of what medieval women really looked like is Tora, a woman who lived 800 years ago in Trondheim, Norway. Unlike the Windsor Beauties, Tora was not a noble or courtesan, but rather an ordinary citizen who lived in a medieval city. Her skeletal remains were discovered during an archaeological excavation in 2019. Researchers from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology used her bones to create a realistic-looking 3D model of what she may have looked like when she was alive. They used computerized tomography or CT scans to analyze her skull and facial features, and then used computer-generated imagery to reconstruct her skin, hair, and eyes. They also used historical sources and archaeological evidence to estimate her age, height, weight, health, and clothing. They found out Tora was likely about 65 when she died, which was quite old for her time. She was about 5 foot 3 inches tall and weighed about 143 pounds. She also had osteoarthritis in her spine and hips, which probably caused her great pain and limited her mobility. From what we know about her background, it's safe to say she probably wore a woolen dress with a linen apron and a shawl over her head. The researchers also gave Tora a vibrant personality and immersive backstory based on their interpretation of her bones. They named her Tora after one of the most common female names in medieval Norway. They imagined she was a widow who lived alone in a small house near the river, and they created a narrative in which she had 3 children who had moved away from home. She worked as a seamstress and made clothes for herself and others, and liked to go to church and socialize with her neighbors. The model of Tora is now on display at the NTNU University Museum as part of an exhibition called Medieval Trondheim. The model is life-sized and shows Tora smiling and holding a walking stick. Cold Case Whithorn. One of the most fascinating projects that used CGI and other scientific means to reconstruct medieval faces was Cold Case Whithorn, an initiative led by the Whithorn Trust, a Scottish non-profit that maintains Whithorn Priory, one of Scotland's first Christian settlements. The project aimed to revisit the archaeological archive of over 42,000 items evacuated from there since the late 19th century, and then apply scientific techniques like radiocarbon dating, stable isotope analysis, and facial reconstruction to shed new light on the lives and deaths of medieval Scots. One of the most remarkable outcomes of the project was the reconstruction of 3 people buried at Whithorn Priory, a cleric from the 13th century, a woman from the 14th, and a man from the 15th century. The facial reconstructions were done by experts from Face Lab at Liverpool's John Moores University using 3D scans of their skulls and historical evidence like clothing and hairstyles. The female subject was especially intriguing because she was buried on a bed of shells in a stone-lined grave near the high altar of Whithorn Priory. This suggests she was a person of high status. She more than likely died between 1300 and 1370 AD at around 45. Her facial reconstruction shows she had a round face with prominent cheekbones, a small nose and chin, brown eyes, and dark hair. She wore a white linen veil over her head and blue woolen dress with red trimmings. The project also revealed some information about her lifestyle, diet, and health based on her bones and teeth. She probably grew up locally in southwest Scotland and had a mainly terrestrial diet with some marine resources like fish or shellfish. Evidence shows she suffered from dental decay, abscesses, and tooth loss, which may have caused her pain and discomfort. She also had osteoarthritis in her spine, which may have affected her mobility. The beauty standards of medieval Scotland were different from those of today. According to historian Eleanor Janega, medieval people valued a high forehead, which women plucked their hairlines to achieve, bright eyes, which they used drops made out of various plants for, rosy cheeks, which they pinched or rubbed with herbs, and white teeth, which they cleaned with a cloth or chewed herbs to maintain. They also liked natural hair colors, like blonde or brown over dyed hair, which was seen as dishonest or immoral. The female subjects from Cold Case Whithorn may have met some of these standards, but not others. For example, she had bright eyes, but not a high forehead. She also had white teeth, but dental problems. She had natural hair color, but also wore a veil that covered most of it. Cold Case Whithorn is an example of how modern tech can help us understand more about medieval people's appearance, identity, and culture. It also shows us that medieval Scots were diverse and complex individuals who had their own unique sense of beauty and style. Beauty, health, and hygiene. Medieval women cared about their appearance and well-being as much as modern women do. They had their own standards of beauty and hygiene influenced by their culture, religion, and social class. They also had access to various sources of knowledge and advice on how to maintain their health and beauty, such as medical treatises, herbal manuals, recipes, and cosmetic guides. One of the most influential authors on female health and beauty in the Middle Ages was Trotula de Ruggiero, a woman physician and obstetrician who lived in Salerno, Italy in the 11th century. She was part of the famous medical school of Salerno, which was the most advanced institution for medical education in Europe at the time. Her most famous work was called The Diseases of Women. It consisted of 63 chapters that covered various aspects of female health, like menstruation, conception, pregnancy, delivery, abortion, contraception, breastfeeding, and sexual pleasure. She also discussed common ailments such as headaches, fever, worms, warts, and corns. She also gave practical advice on how to diagnose and treat these conditions using herbs, drugs, or surgical procedures. She also wrote a book called Trotula Minor. This contained 36 chapters that dealt with various aspects of female beauty like hair care, skin care, makeup, perfumes, baths, and body shape. She also gave detailed recipes for making various cosmetic products like creams, lotions, oils, powders, dyes, and more. She gave tips on how to apply these products to enhance one's appearance. The beauty standards and hygiene practices of medieval women were different from those of today, but not necessarily inferior or less sophisticated. They were based on a different understanding of nature, health, and aesthetics that suited their context and culture. Now it's time to hear from you. Were you surprised to learn how the beauty standards of the medieval era compared to today's? Let us know in the comments section below.